All right, Alex. So, how do you justify all the ancient canons, such as Antioch, Sardica, and the ancient apostolic canons, such as 34, requiring the consent of the church when binding on matters of faith?
I would say that that's perfectly in line with the post-conciliar church, because of the way that the post-conciliar church, what it teaches about the magisterium, that the Pope isn't the only one that is an organ of the magisterium. All of the bishops that are in communion with the church, they all are organs of the magisterium. So back then, that was before the schism. So all of the bishops were in communion with him. So that is perfectly consistent with what Vatican I and Vatican II teach.
I don't agree. Vatican I specifically says that his authority is irreformable of himself and not from the consent of the church. And then the apostolic canon says he must receive the consent of the church. So which is it?
The apostolic canon says that the Bishop of Rome must concede
The first
consent
see.
of the church.
It says the first see must receive the consent of the church. Apostolic canon 34.
Right. Well, you're aware that the apostolic canons actually weren't received in the West, correct?
So you reject. So just to be clear, so you reject the oldest attestation we have of conciliar authority.
So you do realize that the apostolic canons don't come from the apostles themselves, and they were written much later on, around the time of the.
I'm not arguing that they're from the apostles, just like the Apostles' Creed wasn't, but it's apostolic tradition that is preserved in the canons. And so I just want to be clear. So you're rejecting Apostolic Canon 34 and the Council of Antioch and the Council of Sardica?
I reject them as being universally binding because they were never considered to be universally binding by the church.
Well, Sardica was affirmed by the West.
Right, because the West called Sardica, right?
Yes, and I mean the apostolic canons are quoted frequently, actually, in other councils. So just to be clear, so you believe that Apostolic Canon 34 is wrong?
If Apostolic Canon 34, I wouldn't say that it's wrong. I would just say that it isn't binding universally. It isn't binding on the universal church. It could apply in a sense at a more local level.
Okay.
And I will concede that of the apostolic canons, I believe the first 50 of them were considered to be, because the apostolic canons came from an earlier council. I forget what it's called, but it is authentic, and the first 50 of them were considered to be authentic. It just doesn't apply at the universal level.
Okay, so now you're saying it's authentic, but you just don't believe that it's binding on a universal level when it's talking about the first see, though. So how can it not be talking about the universal level if it's talking about the first see?
Because the first see didn't accept it. The canon can be about the first see, but the first see didn't accept it.
The first see did accept it. This is what we find in Sardica, which was affirmed by the Pope.
So the first see accepted certain councils of certain canons of the apostolic canons that were in Sardica, but to my knowledge, I don't believe that specific canon is in the Council of Sardica, or am I wrong?
No. I'm not saying the canon itself is, but the concept of the consent being required in a synod, that was what was necessary.
But this is not what in Sardica.
Yes, it is. It's in Canon 3 and 9 of Sardica.
Yeah. So Canon 3. Can we?
We went over this with your. We went over this with your cross exam.
I don't think I quoted Canon 3 though, right? Because I know that Canon 3 actually bolsters the papal claims. But I would say that Canon 3, we can accept all of Sardica because the first see, the Church of Rome, accepted it.
Okay. Well, again, I say that the Ancient Apostolic Canon 34 says the same thing. It says that the first see must receive the consent of all. So I'll let the audience make their determination on that.
And there is an Orthodox way to actually be able to understand that. The first see having to receive the consent of all, you could say that fits in with Vatican I because the Pope does represent the entire universal church. So you could say that if the Pope says it, that is the consent of all.
Okay. I again say that
the Pope represents the universal church.
We're going in circles, but Vatican I says it's not from the consent of the church, but I'm going to move on. Why wasn't Lateran 649 accepted as ecumenical if this is the Pope's intention?
Refresh my memory. Lateran 649 was the council that I know what you're. I have so many councils in my mind. Say it again.
They were trying to address monothelitism as a ecumenical council.
Oh, and right. So
Pope attempted to make it ecumenical.
Right. So the council itself wasn't accepted as ecumenical, but the actual teachings condemning the monothelite heresy were considered to be definitive.
No, not until so first of all, the monothelitism did not meet a formal anathema until 681 at Constantinople III, and Constantinople III doesn't even mention Lateran as even remotely authoritative.
But it actually does mention the Pope who held Lateran 649,
No,
saying that he had already definitively settled
I would
the
need that
Monothelite
quotation.
heresy. And I quoted that. I'm gonna see if I can find it again, but I did quote it in my I think in my opening statement. I'll see if I can find it really quick. But if you
Okay,
wanted to
well,
move on, feel free. I don't want to eat up your time.
Yeah, I'm going to move on then.
Okay.
What is your justification for why Pope Antecedus concedes to St. Polycarp on the topic of the Quartodecimans? Why would a pope ever concede to another bishop?
Because the Quartodeciman controversy was when he learned that those Christians they were holding to a human apostolic tradition, and he said, "Fine, let it be." And Pope Saint Victor actually did the same thing after initially threatening to excommunicate them, because the Pope has that authority.
No. I don't think you. So Asia Minor was operating. There was the Quartodecimans that were operating in the sense that no matter when Nisan 14 fell, that was when they were going to celebrate Easter.
Correct. Right.
And the Pope was opposed to this. I'm
Right.
not saying that Pope Antecedus was approving of this. He was opposed to this.
Right.
But when Polycarp comes forth and confronts the Pope on trying to excommunicate them over this, he concedes to Polycarp.
Right.
So it's not that he didn't agree. He agreed that this was wrong, that this was the wrong way to celebrate it. Pope Antecedus was not approving of this, but he still concedes to Polycarp, even though he believed this to be wrong. He believed Asia Minor to be in error.
Yeah, because from the earliest times of the church in the West believed that the churches in the East could have their own liturgical traditions in the same way that the Eastern Catholic Church that I belong to has its own liturgical commemorations that don't line up with the Western liturgical commemorations.
Then why would you ever argue that Victor was? So it's either Victor was right or Antecedus was right. Which one was right? Because Victor believed he did have that authority.
No, Antecedus did as well. He just chose not to exercise it in the same way that Victor chose not to exercise it. Because when they both found out that the reason they were celebrating it on the day was because John and Philip, the apostles, were using that calendar, they both said, okay, so it's a human apostolic tradition. We can let it be. Human apostolic traditions don't have to be changed. But they can be because, for example, the churches in Asia Minor eventually did change that tradition, and they moved over to the Julian calendar as well at the Council of Nicaea. So even traditions that come from the apostles themselves, if they're human apostolic traditions, not divine apostolic traditions, they can be changed if it's necessary. It's rare, but it has happened.
But the point is that it was over the same issue.
Right.
And you have one pope. We have one pope who again, decides not to exercise only when Polycarp comes and vouches for him.
Yeah, and the same thing happened with Victor because Saint Irenaeus came to vouch for the church in Asia Minor. Exactly. Yeah, because the popes just weren't aware that was the tradition of the apostles. They just didn't know. So when they found out that it was, like I said, they let it be. They said, okay.
That doesn't answer why Pope Antecedus was comfortable conceding to another see.
That isn't something that's out of the ordinary. If he was able to concede to another see, it just means that he said, okay, this other see is correct. That's actually really good.
The point. He didn't believe he was correct. Hang on, that's the point, though. He didn't believe that he was correct. He believed that they were still wrong. The Asian Minor churches were wrong, but he still concedes to Polycarp.
Because this isn't a matter of divine apostolic tradition. It's a matter of human apostolic tradition. Because even Pope Victor, same thing. He believed that they were wrong, but he still let them be because it's not a hill to die on. It's not an issue of what is revealed by God. This isn't my cross exam, but I would say that the date of Easter isn't something that was revealed. It's not in the Bible. It's not in the deposit of faith. It's not in a sacred tradition. It's these are human traditions that came from the apostles in the same way that like the sign of the cross is a human tradition, and those can be let be. But again, if the Pope wanted to, he could change them, and they have been changed over the last 2,000 years. Some human apostolic traditions, for example, like facing ad orientem during the liturgy, that goes back to Christ and the apostles, but not all of the apostolic churches do that anymore. And that's fine.
I'll let the audience make their determination on that one. All right, let's move on. So Thomas Aquinas was heavily influenced by papal forgeries in his work against the errors of the Greeks. The Council of Trent references them in session 22 to justify the Pope as the sole source of jurisdiction in the Church, and Pope Leo IX references the donation of Constantine in his letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople on the eve of the schism in 1054. So my question for you is, you wouldn't forge a deed to a house if you already own the house, and you certainly wouldn't use a forged deed to prove you own a house that you legitimately own. So why did a supposedly infallible council and multiple highly influential Western saints reference forged documents to prove the papacy?
Well, if you actually go back to and I'm going to answer your question, but I just want to say that everything that proves the papacy can be found in all of in most of the councils before those documents were forged. And the infallible councils, this is what everyone needs to understand, is that infallibility only pertains to matters of faith and morals, not even matters of fact. So if a council is using forgeries, and let's say that a council pronounces on matters of doctrine, on dogmatic matters of faith and morals, those decrees that the councils or even the Pope by himself, those decrees that are made are protected by the Holy Spirit, and they're not going to be wrong, even if the documents that are being used are spurious. So the church isn't protected in matters of fact. The church is only protected, only infallible in matters of faith and morals. In the same way that when the Council of Ephesus condemned Nestorius as a heretic, we know now, looking back, that the council was actually incorrect. It turns out that Nestorius wasn't a Nestorian, but the council still condemned him as a Nestorian, and they were wrong. In the same way that when Constantinople III condemned Honorius, we actually know now that Honorius didn't hold to that heresy. The council was wrong, because councils can err in matters of fact, because there isn't anything in divine revelation that says that Honorius is a heretic or Nestorian is a Nestorian. There's nothing in divine revelation that says that. So the church can err in those kind of matters.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, Nestorius was not a Nestorian in the sense that he believed that Christ was two persons, but he did reject the term Theotokos. And that is what makes him logically still a Nestorian. So it was correct to condemn him as a heresy and guilty of that heresy. But I didn't feel like you answered the actual question that I'm really trying to get at, which is why were these forgeries? Specifically, let's zero in on Pope Leo IX. When he references the donation of Constantine, he doesn't reference the letter of he doesn't reference the letter of Pope Celestine, doesn't reference the letter of Pope Agatho. His justification is the donation of Constantine. So why did he feel the need to utilize something that doesn't exist? I'm not saying he thought it was legitimate, but why did he feel the need to reference something that had stronger language than these other genuine examples?
I would even go as far as to say that he did think it was legitimate, because everyone in those days thought that it was legitimate.
I'm conceding that.
And the reason that he appealed to it is because the truths that are found in those forgeries are still true, because they're actually already found since the very beginning of the church, before those forgeries were ever even written. So if you find a forgery that says something in it that happens to be true, you can't be faulted for using the forgery, because the one thing that it says that is true can be proven throughout the last 2,000 years. And as far as the donation of Constantine goes, there's something that I could actually flip to that I can read really quick. It says this: donation of Constantine. Scholar Henry Chadwick says that. One quick second. I'm trying to find. And if you wanted to move on, I don't want to eat up your time. But there's a scholar here. Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
Actually, go ahead. Read a quotation.
I'm just trying. I'm trying to find it. It's right here, like on page. I think it's on page 120. Let me find it really, really quick. I really don't want to eat up your time, man. So if you want to, let me see if I could find it.
Yeah. All right. So the Constitutum of Vigilius. Which Constitutum of Vigilius was ex cathedra if both meet the requirement?
So the Constitutum of Pope Vigilius, actually, they all taught the same thing. And let me explain.
That's incorrect.
Well, no, actually, let me explain how they actually did. Because the documents that Pope Vigilius wrote during the Council of Constantinople II, they all maintained the Orthodox faith. This is where we get into the distinction between matters of revealed doctrine and matters of fact. So we know that in one constitutum, he rejected the 3 chapters, right? In the first one, he rejected the 3 chapters, but that caused a schism in Rome. So he pulled it back because he didn't want there to be a schism in Rome.
That was the Judicatum.
The Judicatum, I'm sorry. And then in the next one, right, he was trying to defend the 3 chapters. But how did he do it? When he wrote the second document, he was defending the 3 chapters by trying to make them sound orthodox, trying to make them sound in line with Pope Leo's tome. So whether he was rejecting the 3 chapters or whether he was trying to defend the 3 chapters, what he is doing in both of those instances is maintaining the Orthodox faith, the faith of Chalcedonian Christianity. In the same way that the council can err in rejecting Pope Nestorius by condemning him, he could technically err by affirming something that might be in substance heretical, but his understanding of it would actually be orthodox. Because again, they're not infallible in matters of fact; they're infallible in matters of faith and morals, matters of dogma.
Okay, so I just want to really clarify for the audience the timeline here. So then I'm going to ask my question that has to do with this, because I really need to clear this up. The Judicatium was 2 years prior to the council. It moderately condemned the 3 chapters. Then during the council, he issues his first constitutum, which does condemn the 3 chapters. But however, he tries to maintain the 3 authors of the 3 chapters as saints. He tries to maintain them as saints. So then the council, in response back, says, you don't have this apostolic authority over us. 2 is better than 1. The whole quotation I read. And so then they proceed to condemn the authors of the 3 chapters as heretics. And then a year later, or a little less than a year later, is when Vigilius issues his final constitutum, which does contradict his former one, because it does say that the 3 authors were heretics. So you do have one that says they were not heretics and one that says they were. They're conflicting constitutums. So which one was the true one that was asserted by the apostolic authority?
So they contradicted themselves in matters of fact, but not in matters of faith. He was defending the Orthodox faith in both. So you could pick either or. The one where he accepted them as saints is fine. The one where he rejected them is fine, because he was still upholding the Orthodox faith. Just like Nestorius really wasn't a Nestorian and they condemned him wrongly, Pope Honorius wasn't really a heretic either, they condemned him wrongly. You can technically affirm something that maybe is heretical, and I do believe that the 3 chapters were heretical, but if it's the interpretation that you give is orthodox, that interpretation of the Orthodox faith is what stands. So you can pick either or. The Orthodox faith still stands.
So you would not put a saint, someone either being a saint or a heretic. This means that someone that could be interceding for you, or they're literally a heretic. Those are the 2 options. And you're saying that's not a matter, that's just a simple matter of fact. That's not a matter of faith.
A simple matter of fact would be that somebody is in heaven interceding for you.
No, I'm saying the issue at hand is whether or not these individuals are either interceding for us or they're heretics. That's right. And you're saying that's just a small little matter of fact. That's all that is.
Right. So those 3, the 3, Theodore Mopsuestia, Theodore Red, and the other guy, they could be, it's possible that they are in heaven interceding for us, even if the church doesn't recognize them as being in heaven as interceding for us.
That's irrelevant to the point. The point is that you're minimizing the distinction between the disparity between the first constitutum and the second constitutum. You're saying it was just a simple matter of fact, but this is much larger than a matter of fact. This is 3 individuals who could be interceding. People could have been asking for intercession. I mean, and so this is not a small little matter of fact. This is significant.
Right. So the point of the writings was actually
let's just keep it in the form of questions again as a reminder.
Okay, got you.
Right. So the point is of the writings was to obtain the Orthodox faith. Whether the writings were going to canonize these guys as saints or not is actually a separate matter. And eventually they decide on not considering them saints. But that doesn't mean that they're not saints. It's possible that they could be saints. The church just doesn't recognize.
But you're missing the overarching point here.
I would say that they didn't condemn them to hell because the church has never condemned anybody to hell.
But here's what I'm asking, right? Is the authority of the Apostolic See was appealed to when he was making when he releases his first constitutum.
Right.
He says no one ought to question this going forth by the authority of the Apostolic See.
Right.
So we can move on. My next question has to do with this, so I'm going to stay right here.
Okay.
So in the Fifth Ecumenical Council, in response back to Vigilius, states there's no other way to resolve matters of faith but in a council with conciliar discussion. How do you reconcile that with Vatican I?
They wrote that to Vigilius, right?
They wrote back to Vigilius, and they say The only they literally say there is no other way to resolve matters of faith but in common discussion.
Well,
This is their response. This is the response to Vigilius when he tries to implement his apostolic authority.
This was after the second one, right? Where he's trying to.
This is the first. This is the Constitutum. This was the one that he gave them. You're thinking of the Judicatium 2 years prior. This is the Constitutum that was at the actual council itself. Yes.
Right. So when I say that the second one, I mean the second of the three, because there were three of them.
Yes.
So I would just say that Pope Vigilius, he rejected that. He rejected what they wrote back to him because he continued to write against the council, and he continued to make decrees apart from the council, and he considered them to be authoritative. So just because the acts of the councils might say this, because the Roman emperor said something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true.
So to be blatantly clear, are you saying the bishops of Constantinople II were wrong to say that the only way to resolve matters of faith is in a council? Are they wrong?
Yes, because there were matters to resolve faith before the issue of Constantinople II that took place that were not in the council. All of the times that the bishops of Rome were able to universally settle matters of doctrine.
Okay, and you also said that he continued to stand by his first constitutum, but he doesn't. So how do you reconcile that answer with the fact that he finally does submit to the council when he releases his second constitutum?
Well, first of all, I would say that he didn't submit to the council. If you go back to my opening statement where I talk about it, his writings don't even mention the council by name. He ratifies it, but he doesn't submit to the council. In fact, he finally condemned the 3 chapters by his own authority without mentioning the council. So he finally ratified the council, but in his writings, he was clear that the buck stopped with him, and he wasn't doing it because the council said you had to do it. He was doing it because he wanted to do it because he finally did it. And then he ratified the council because it agreed with him. If Pope Vigilius had never ratified the council, it would never be considered ecumenical by either the Catholic or the Orthodox churches.
Okay. So I think I get to respond to that without
of course,
the
go
formal
ahead.
question. Okay.
Yeah.
But the council didn't agree with him. That's the point. That's why the council was asserting this authority over Vigilius. And you already said they were wrong to do that. But the point is, you just said the council agreed with him. No, they didn't. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, the council agreed with him in the sense that they wanted to condemn the 3 chapters. Because you would say that the council condemned the 3 chapters, and then Pope Vigilius eventually condemned the 3 chapters as well, right? So they both eventually did the same thing.
No, the 3 it was over the authors. That was the disagreement. The council disagreed with Pope Vigilius about the 3 authors. Right. That's what they were disagreeing on.
Right. Yeah, and there could be a disagreement over, we don't want to canonize certain individuals as saints, and if the Pope wanted to, he could, but if he didn't want to, he doesn't have to, because again, just because the church doesn't canonize somebody as saints doesn't mean that they're not saints. They could still be in heaven praying for us. The church just doesn't officially recognize them. So it's not a hill to die on, is what I'm saying.
Well, okay, but the overarching point is a hill to die on, and that would be when they assert their authority over Vigilius. And then Vigilius, again, he does, and you can say submit, you can say affirm, but eventually he does affirm the conclusion of the council. And at no point do the patriarchs apologize to him for asserting their authority over him. At no point does he say they were wrong to do it. He just writes his second constitutum, and which does submit to what the council also decided.
Let's say that it agreed with what the council decided, not that he submitted to it, because again, in that second constitutum, he doesn't even mention the council by name.
It agrees with the council and contradicts his first constitutum.
Right, yeah, and that's fine. That can happen because again, the point of it wasn't to. It's not like the council was saying, Pope Vigilius, you need to condemn these guys to hell. Pope Vigilius is just now saying we're not going to recognize them as saints, and that's all it is, and that's fine. Because the Pope doesn't need to recognize every person as a saint. Again, it just wasn't the hill to die on for Vigilius.
Okay, real quick. In the Sixth Ecumenical Council, was Pope Honorius not a heretic, or was Pope Agatho wrong to condemn him as a heretic? Which position do you take? So
Pope Agatho was wrong, and the council was wrong to condemn him as a heretic because, and I know that you popped up, that's actually not a big deal to say that, because councils can err in matters of fact, because Pope Honorius, being a heretic, isn't something that is in the deposit of faith. There's nowhere in the Bible that you can turn to, or an apostolic tradition that you can go to, that says Pope Honorius is a heretic. So if the council can be wrong in condemning Nestorius, it could be wrong in condemning Honorius. It was wrong in both counts. And the fact is that councils can err. Not everything that they say is infallible. Only things that are part of the deposit of faith, matters of faith and morals.